After saving for 3 months to throw her the perfect birthday, I walked in early with the ring in my pocket and heard her laugh. He's just my safety net until I find someone better. I turned around, took the ring with me, and let her calls pile up while I drove into a life she'll never be part of. I, 31M, walked into our apartment at 6:47 p.m. on a Thursday. 3 months of careful planning and saving finally coming together. The engagement ring felt heavy in my jacket pocket, a 1.2-carat diamond that had consumed every spare dollar I'd earned since February. Her birthday party was scheduled for Saturday, but I'd convinced myself that proposing beforehand would make the celebration even more perfect. The apartment was supposed to be empty. She'd told me she was working late at the marketing firm, wouldn't be home until after 8. But I heard voices coming from our bedroom, her distinctive laugh echoing down the hallway. My heart actually lifted for a moment, thinking maybe she'd come home early and I could surprise her with the ring tonight instead of waiting. I moved quietly down the hall, not wanting to startle her if she was on a work call. That's when I heard her voice clearly, speaking to someone I couldn't see. She was telling them about her weekend plans, about the party I'd been organizing. Then she mentioned me, and my blood turned cold. She laughed again, that same laugh I'd fallen in love with 2 years ago, and said I was just her safety net until she found someone better. The words hit me like a physical blow. She went on, explaining how I was reliable and paid half the rent, but she was actively looking for someone with more ambition, more money, someone who could actually take her places. I stood frozen in that hallway for maybe 30 seconds, feeling everything I'd built crumble around me. The ring in my pocket suddenly felt like it weighed 50 pounds. 3 months of overtime shifts, skipped lunches, walking to work instead of taking the bus. Also, I could afford the perfect proposal for someone who saw me as a placeholder. I turned around and walked back to the front door, moving as quietly as I'd entered. My hands were shaking as I closed the door behind me, and I realized I was holding my breath. The engagement ring was still in my pocket, and suddenly I wanted it as far away from this place as possible. My phone started buzzing before I even reached the elevator. She must have heard the door. I ignored the first call, then the second. By the time I reached my car, she'd called 4 times and sent 3 texts asking where I was, saying she thought she heard me come in. I drove without any destination in mind, just needed to move, needed distance between myself and the life I'd thought we were building together. The ring box kept pressing against my ribs every time I shifted in the driver's seat, a constant reminder of how completely I'd misjudged everything. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in the parking lot of a 24-hour diner on the outskirts of town, staring at my phone as her calls kept coming. 17 missed calls, 23 text messages. The messages started casual, asking if I was okay, but quickly shifted to concerned, then frantic. She was asking if something had happened, if I was hurt. Where was I? I turned the phone off and went inside the diner. The waitress, probably in her 60s with tired eyes, poured me coffee without asking and told me the pie was fresh. I wasn't hungry, but I ordered a slice anyway, needing something normal to anchor myself to. That's when I started thinking clearly for the first time in months. I pulled out my laptop and began making lists. Our lease was in both names, but I'd been the one making most of the payments. I had records of everything. The car was mine. Most of the furniture was mine from before we moved in together. She'd contributed some kitchen stuff and bathroom accessories, but the big items, all the things that mattered, they were mine. More importantly, I started thinking about what I actually wanted from life. The past 2 years, I'd been so focused on what she wanted, what would make her happy, that I'd lost track of my own goals. I'd turned down a job offer in another city 6 months ago because she didn't want to move. I'd been saving for an engagement ring instead of the photography equipment I'd been wanting for years. I pulled up my email and found that job offer from the tech company in Seattle. It had been a significant promotion, nearly double my current salary, working on projects that actually interested me instead of the mindless data entry I'd been doing. I deleted it back then, but I remembered the hiring manager's name. By 2 a.m., I drafted an email asking if the position was still available or if they had similar openings. I explained that my circumstances had changed and I was now very interested in relocating. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. I drove to a hotel and checked in, ignoring the 37 missed calls and 51 text messages that had accumulated since I'd turned my phone back on. Her messages had gone through several phases: concern, confusion, anger, and now desperation. She was asking what she'd done wrong, begging me to come home so we could talk. The irony wasn't lost on me. She wanted to talk now, but she'd been perfectly comfortable discussing my inadequacies with someone else when she thought I couldn't hear. Update 1. I woke up at 6 a.m. to my phone buzzing with a call from an unknown Seattle number. The hiring manager from the tech company was calling personally. He told me they'd been hoping I'd reconsider, that the position was still open, and asked if I could fly out for an interview next week. I told him I could be there tomorrow if needed. He laughed and said he appreciated the enthusiasm, but Monday would be fine. We talked for 20 minutes about the role, the team, the projects I'd be working on. By the end of the call, I felt more energized about work than I had in 2 years. She'd called 16 more times overnight. The text messages were getting increasingly frantic. She'd figured out I wasn't coming home and was demanding to know what was wrong, what had happened, why I was being so cruel. The word cruel made me laugh. She thought silence was cruel, but somehow discussing her plans to replace me wasn't. I drove to work and submitted my 2 weeks' notice. My boss was surprised but understanding when I told him I had an opportunity in Seattle. He asked if it was sudden, and I told him yes, very sudden. He wished me luck and said they'd miss me. Next, I went to our bank and opened a new account, transferring my direct deposit and half the money from our joint savings account. Legally, I was entitled to all of it since I'd contributed about 80%, but I wasn't trying to be vindictive about money. I just wanted what was mine. Then I went apartment hunting online. Seattle had a competitive rental market, but with my new salary range, I could afford places I'd only dreamed about. I found a one-bedroom with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay. The rent was more than I'd ever paid, but it would be mine alone. She was waiting in the parking lot when I got off work. I saw her car and almost turned around, but decided this conversation needed to happen eventually. She looked like she'd been crying, her makeup smeared, still wearing the same clothes from yesterday. She rushed over the moment she saw me, asking what was wrong, why I'd disappeared, why I wasn't answering her calls. Her voice was shaking, and she looked genuinely panicked. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. I told her we needed to break up. Just like that. No build-up, no explanation. The words came out calmer than I'd expected. She stared at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. She asked why, what had changed, what she'd done. I told her it didn't matter what she'd done, that I'd realized we weren't compatible long-term. She started crying harder, saying we could work through whatever was wrong, that she loved me, that we were good together. I almost laughed at that. We were good together from her perspective because I was convenient, reliable, safe. I paid my bills and didn't ask for much. But I wasn't enough for her, and I'd finally accepted that. She begged me to come home so we could discuss it properly. I told her I'd be by Saturday to get my things, that she could have until then to figure out her next steps. The lease was up for renewal next month anyway, and I wouldn't be signing. Update 2. Monday morning, I was on a plane to Seattle. The interview went better than I'd hoped. They offered me the position on the spot, with a start date in 3 weeks and a signing bonus that would more than cover my moving expenses. I accepted immediately. I spent the rest of the day apartment hunting in person. The place with the bay view was even better than the photos suggested. I signed the lease that afternoon, paying first month's rent, last month's rent, and security deposit with the signing bonus money. She'd been calling and texting constantly, but I'd stopped reading the messages. My voicemail was full. I cleared it without listening to anything. When I landed back home Tuesday evening, I found she'd enlisted her sister to help with the emotional manipulation. Her sister called me, saying I was being unreasonable, that relationships required communication, that I owed her an explanation at minimum. I told her sister that some things didn't require discussion, that I'd made my decision and it was final. She accused me of being cold and heartless. I thanked her for her opinion and hung up. Wednesday, I started packing. I'd already arranged for a moving company to handle the big items. Everything else fit into boxes surprisingly easily. 2 years of shared life condensed into a dozen cardboard containers. She came home while I was packing the kitchen. She looked awful, like she hadn't slept in days. She asked again what she'd done, why I was destroying our relationship over nothing. She said she'd been racking her brain trying to figure out what could have changed so suddenly. I continued packing while she talked. She grew more agitated when I didn't respond, demanding that I at least look at her, that I owe her basic respect after 2 years together. The word respect struck me as particularly absurd. Finally, she asked if there was someone else. if I'd found someone new and was too cowardly to admit it. That's when I stopped packing and looked at her directly. I told her yes, in a way, I had found someone else. I'd found the person I used to be before I started trying to be good enough for her. I'd found the version of myself that had ambitions and dreams instead of just trying to be the perfect, reliable boyfriend. She looked confused, so I explained further. I told her I'd realized I'd been settling, accepting less than I deserved, trying to be someone's safety net when I should have been living my own life. The recognition in her eyes was instant and terrifying. She knew. Somehow, she understood exactly what I was referring to. Her face went white, and she asked me how long I'd known. Update 3. I told her it didn't matter how long I'd known, that the timeline was irrelevant. What mattered was that I finally understood where I stood in her life, and I decided that position wasn't acceptable to me anymore. She started apologizing then, crying, saying it wasn't what I thought, that she'd been confused and scared about commitment. She said she did love me, that she'd been talking to her friend about her fears, not about actually replacing me. I kept packing while she explained. She said she'd been panicking about our relationship getting serious, that she'd been working through her commitment issues with someone she trusted. She swore she'd never been looking for someone else, that I'd misunderstood the conversation. But I hadn't misunderstood. I'd heard her laugh while discussing my role as her temporary placeholder. I'd heard the casual way she dismissed our entire relationship as something she was enduring until she found an upgrade. She followed me from room to room as I packed, continuing her explanations. She promised to do better, to be more honest about her feelings, to work on appreciating what we had together. She said she'd been taking me for granted, but that she could change. I found myself feeling sorry for her, watching her scramble to repair something she'd already destroyed. But the pity was distant, like watching a sad movie about someone else's life. Thursday morning, the movers came. She'd called in sick to work and spent the morning crying on the couch, occasionally asking if I was really doing this, if I was really throwing away everything we'd built. I signed the papers with the moving company and handed over the keys to the apartment. She asked where I was going, and I told her it didn't concern her anymore. She asked if we could stay in touch, if maybe we could work things out later when emotions weren't so high. I told her no. Clean breaks were cleaner for everyone. That afternoon, I drove to the jewelry store where I'd bought the engagement ring. The owner remembered me, asked how the proposal had gone. I told him there hadn't been a proposal and that I needed to return the ring. He was understanding, even though I was past the normal return window. He asked if everything was all right, and I told him everything was better than it had been in months. He smiled at that and processed the return without any hassle. With the ring money back in my account, I had enough to buy the professional camera equipment I'd been wanting for years. I drove to the photography store and spent 2 hours selecting lenses, filters, lighting equipment. The salesperson was enthusiastic about my choices, asking what kind of photography I was planning to do. I told him I wasn't sure yet, that I was moving to a new city and wanted to explore different options. Maybe landscapes, maybe street photography, maybe portraits. He said that was the best approach, to experiment and find what spoke to me. Friday was my last day at work. My colleagues took me to lunch and wished me well. Several of them said they envied my courage to make such a big change, that they'd been thinking about new opportunities but never had the nerve to actually pursue them. My boss pulled me aside before I left and told me I'd always have a reference from him, that he'd been impressed by my professionalism during the transition. He said he hoped Seattle appreciated what they were getting. That evening, I loaded my car with the last of my personal items and drove to a hotel near the airport. My flight was early Saturday morning, and I wanted to avoid any potential drama at the apartment. She'd stopped calling sometime Thursday afternoon. The silence from her felt strange after days of constant contact attempts. Part of me wondered if she'd finally accepted that it was over, or if she was planning some last-minute gesture. Saturday morning, I was at the airport by 5 a.m. for my 7 a.m. flight. As I sat in the departure lounge, I felt lighter than I had in months. The city I was leaving held 2 years of memories, most of them good at the time, but all of them tainted now by the knowledge of how she really felt. Seattle represented possibility, a new job that excited me, an apartment that was entirely mine, a camera kit that would let me pursue interests I'd neglected for too long. Most importantly, it represented a life where I wouldn't be anyone's safety net or backup plan. The plane lifted off exactly on time. I watched my old city shrink beneath the clouds and felt nothing but relief. Somewhere down there, she was probably waking up in an apartment that was too expensive for her to afford alone, realizing that her safety net was gone and she'd have to figure out her next move without me. 3 months later, I got a LinkedIn message from her. She'd found my new company profile and wanted to congratulate me on the promotion. She said she was proud of me for taking such a big step and that she hoped I was doing well. I didn't respond. Some chapters needed to stay closed. Instead, I spent that weekend at Pike Place Market, photographing vendors and street performers, capturing moments of genuine joy and authentic human connection. Later, I printed the best shots and hung them in my apartment, proof that beauty existed when you stopped settling for less than you deserved. The ring I'd planned to give her had become camera equipment that brought me daily satisfaction. The money I'd been saving for our shared future was now invested in my individual growth. The life I'd thought I wanted had been replaced by something infinitely better, a life that was actually mine. Sometimes I wondered if she ever found someone better, someone who met her standards for ambition and success. But mostly, I didn't think about her at all. I was too busy building something real.